And I think I am Samuel Trapp. In fact, I'm pretty sure I am Samuel Trapp. I'm pretty sure I'm on damn radio, and I'm absolutely certain that this is international flavor. I am here waiting for my esteemed brother and colleague to show up into the green room so that he can speak as well and join us tonight. I wanted to let you know that you can feel free to call in and chat with us. Give us a little bit of time to lay the groundwork. We've had a great 3-4 episodes of my brother speaking on the topics of conspiracy, mostly, or people would label it as conspiracy, and he's provided some interesting data to me. I think you may have just joined us. Matthew, are you with us?
I am.
Oh, wow. How do you like that? Say something again so I can make sure you're being heard.
Yep, I'm here.
Well, there you have it. And the sound quality is just fantastic. I was just walking everybody through the fact that they are welcome to call in. The phone number is 573-746-8020. And I was outlining that you had done 3-4 programs in the past and walked us to prep us for the conspiracy possibility. You set us up with some interesting tales of some Bush action, some CIA things that have been going on forever. I, from my own personal knowledge, feel that we are a little more likely to agree these days. Normally we wouldn't be, but the government and all of the media have lied to us so consistently for so long that it's hard to believe anything. So I'm approaching it from that point of view. But you sent me a little homework list that I had to go, and I took you up on it on a couple of these topics that we brought up. But I'll let you outline where you'd like to go today.
Sounds great. Well, thanks for having me again. It's interesting because you talked about people don't know where to turn for truth. And that's really unfortunate that the truth is the thing that has become obscured the most from Americans' view, right? It used to be that it was a given, and that's why we just assumed it. But now we have two very distinct narratives, neither of which is the truth, and we're told to believe one or the other, and that is the biggest falsehood that you can come up with. So before we begin, maybe a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to say it again, that believe what you're going to believe, but do your own research, right? You're the one choosing the sources of your research. And so you need to be careful about which sources you choose. If you only choose from one, if you only drink from one bucket, then, you never know whether that was poison or not. But we've got a lot of material to go through tonight, so I'm not going to be able to get into the details of everything. We're going to have to use the dipstick approach in a lot of things, where we're going to go in and touch on things. So in some areas, I will be using like vast generalizations, right? And I hate to do that, but I'll try to point those out as we go along. But this is so I can get through all the material, and I will zoom in and zoom out as needed. Also, I'm traveling and operating via small screen laptop. So I usually have a nice set of monitors where I've got all my notes up and I've downloaded articles from the internet and things that I can reference. In this case, I'm on a small screen, so bear with me while I switch back and forth between pages of notes.
No problem at all. Sorry to interrupt you there, but before you get too far, and I pulled up way back when we started down this path, I remembered you sharing some video with me, and there were two or three that you shared with me over the last several weeks, and I think I might. Uh, we don't have to address them tonight, but the one with the guy who was a film editor, that was a very interesting one. That's 45 minutes. I plan to.
Yeah, what was his name? Colin, I think.
I don't know, but I copied it so I could provide it or give us a couple of minutes of it. You know, if you felt the urge, and I copied all the links. I sent them to myself so that I would have them available, and so that one in particular was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and he did 9 of those that were 45 minutes to an hour each.
Wow.
And that video set I have, just that one video that I shared with you, though, is the one I was telling you about, I think, on the previous program, that I got banned from Microsoft. They shut my account, locked it, wouldn't give me access. Ever. They never have restored it.
Wow.
So
because you chose to believe it, or
because I chose to share it.
You shared it with somebody on SharePoint or on what?
No, just off of my the mistake I made is that it was on my OneDrive account. So when I shared it, my account was almost immediately locked. And we'll get into some of that tonight, because how does that mechanism get into place, right? How does something like that happen within a corporation on behalf of a government? And we've seen all that with Facebook, and we saw Mark Zuckerberg, pleading for our forgiveness.
Well, I had to start a brand new Facebook page. I got like 100 friends. I had like 5,800. You know what I mean? And all of my new stuff, I had to completely restart. And so it's and the only way to
blocked the president of the United States at the time. Come on.
Well, I know it's a joke, and all I did was, I was anti-vax, and I said something about the letter Z, just not because I'm a Putin supporter, but I'm not a blind Ukraine supporter. You know what I mean? So there's plenty of that
out there.
Plenty of truth out there.
Yeah, so let me start by going over just a little bit of the previous 4 episodes, as is tradition. I'll try to cut through this quickly. But recapping episodes 1 through 4. And tonight's topic is 9/11 and how it enabled the rise of globalist power, right? So episode 1 was the American world order and how it was built after World War II through Bretton Woods, NATO, the US dollar dominance, all of these kinds of things. And we said it was peaking in the late 1980s. But when the decline began, the globalists, right, and they became globalists because what they wanted was a new world order. They didn't want the Chinese world order that was rising. China was rising. And China was set to be the new global superpower when America faded out, just as we took over from the Brits, and the Brits took over from the Dutch, and the Dutch took over, right? You see this whole pattern emerging. The Chinese have been a global power for 3 times in their existence. So episode 2, because they didn't want the Chinese to take over, they began engineering what George H. Bush called a new world order. And they began right away. It wasn't something that they just, think about doing that down the road. Episode 2 zoomed in on how, particularly the Bush family, but some of these elite families, and I'm going to call them elite families just because they have intergenerational power that's carried from one generation to another. So we trace that back to Prescott Bush, who was George W. Bush's grandfather, George H. Bush's father, etc. And that intergenerational power and wealth, like the Rockefellers and these type of folks, bring a different kind of power, right? So then we talked about how how these guys helped shape this new order that was coming to be. Now, a lot of people see Donald Trump and they're like, "Oh, he's forming a new order in the world." Well, you didn't complain when the Bushes did it, right? We're going to get into that a little bit.
Yeah.
And so we zoomed in on that. This episode 3, we showed how this globalist influence, what we defined what globalism was, versus nationalism versus globalization, and how it works, how the influence works behind the scenes. A lot of people are like, "Oh, you have to believe in conspiracies to believe that." No. Do you actually watch TV and you see the World Trade Organization or any of these other? They exert global influence and global control in some cases. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. It's a fact of life. It's an organization just like McDonald's is, right? We're just talking about how they operate. So episode 4, and we did go into some nuances, right? Because we talked about the some of the families and how they changed demographics of like New York City, right? And in episode 4, as we talked more about globalism, we talked about how it was a full-blown operating system, right? So that brings us to today's episode. Now, if I was going to ask you what single event gave the globalists their biggest leap forward in power, and when I say the globalists, I mean global organizations, NATO, UN, all of these, what gave them their biggest leap forward in power? What would you say?
Well, the bits of law that went into place after 9/11, I would say, the things that they were granted, like from my point of view, and I have a different point of view than a lot because I watched it through the lens of arms control when Putin kept going, how can I be a member of NATO, and why do you keep expanding NATO westward? Bush 1, you said you wouldn't. Why do you keep doing it?
Well, we need an enemy and you're it.
but they lied about it even there. First you need an enemy, but we're not doing this against you. We got bin Laden to worry about.
Oh yeah.
We're putting our missiles all over Europe.
Don't go too far. Don't go too far, because you're going to get into some of the stuff that we'll try to put it in a structure. But
okay, well,
when
you asked, and I
no, it's perfect.
Answering,
it's perfect.
So.
I want to make sure that some things are revealed in order, and when I'm asking about that, and you actually gave a perfect answer, because most people go, well, we had some surveillance, we had a little bit of these things, but they were kind of necessary. Like, most people don't see the grand picture of what happened. But the short answer is that 9/11 wasn't just a tragedy. It was a catalyst, and one that rewired the entire world order, right? The world order literally changed after 9/11. And a lot of people are, like I said, are freaking out about what Trump's doing. And they did not see that it changed in all the key areas after 9/11. Now, what's interesting, so when you think about any tragedy that's out there, you have some that are more impactful than others, unfortunately. So you have like a car accident. Somebody dies in a car accident. It may affect those families. It may affect someone in the community. Maybe it was a mayor that died in a car accident or something. Now we can start looking bigger and bigger. 9/11, there were a little over 3,000 people killed in those buildings. But the impact globally was massive. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to show some things. Now, do you remember, think about this. They kept 9/11 alive for like 20 years. Do you remember we had those big like every year the big commemoration, and then there were all these things that were going on. And I was like, man, the media has never used anything like this for a while. I'm like, they're trying to keep this in Americans' memories for some reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
But remember, they were doing this, but the first thing they did on 9/11, within hours, they had dump trucks there hauling things away. And remember, it's the largest crime scene in the world. And they were hauling the steel away, in particularly to places like China, which is exactly where a large portion of it went. Now, that's pretty fast mobilization. That's really fast mobilization.
Well, why
But
would they send it? Why would they send it to China?
Exactly. So we're going to get into some of that. I think we're going to talk about a lot of the anomalies probably in the next episode, but I want to dive into this one, something that we just touched on, which was the impact of 9/11. Because when you see the impact, you'll see something completely different in 9/11. So let's talk about now. Episode 4 was important because it was about globalism, not globalization, where you can go to Norway and expect similar treatment than you would have in the U.S. and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not talking about buying a product over there, a hair care product. I'm talking about globalism, which is forming a interconnected global organizations that constitute a global government, right? So, and again, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I just want you to think through that. So let's look at, I'm going to list these first and then we'll go in depth. First is increased international security cooperation. Makes sense, right? We got to cooperate. We just got our butts handed to us by these terrorizers, right? Number 2, expansion of global surveillance networks ties into that. But that's a little bit different than the security cooperation. Now we have number 3, which is strengthen multilateral institutions. 4 is accelerated economic integration. 5 is global legal harmonization. And as an attorney, you would know that the importance of that. 6 is cultural and ideological influence. So we got people like we're listening to K-pop over here, and the Koreans are listening to Mick Jagger, and I mean we've got more kind of cross-border harmony of likes and dislikes, including Coke and Pepsi and hot dogs. Justification for foreign intervention and regime change. And 8 is centralization of technological control and regulation. Now, if I look at those 8 there, right, I see that very quickly, the security cooperation expanded intelligence sharing post 9/11. Surveillance infrastructure included global biometric standards, enhanced tracking and monitoring.
That stuff scares me, and I don't like it. And I remember when I very first ran into it was in Qatar when they would scan your eyeballs. Yep, they scan in your eyeballs, and they suddenly got. I mean, you aren't faking it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's no way you can fake that. Yeah.
Not that we want to, but it's just I don't want to be tracked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now we're tracked everywhere. Those things exist in Russia. You go to Russia, they got them. You everywhere you go, everybody knows where you've been, and you can't hide. And if somebody I suppose you go to countries that aren't on the charts, but now the only way to do it is by your own island, and most of us can't do that.
Oh yeah, yeah. You need to have a different level of money in order to move around. Yeah. Multilateral institutions. We had stronger roles for the UN, NATO, and various alliances to manage global threats. Economic integration. You may remember in Qatar, we had to fill out the forms for bank accounts so the U.S. could collect taxes on us while we were living and working overseas.
Yeah, they do that everywhere still.
Mm-hmm. Legal harmonization, we talked about that, common legal frameworks. This included facilitating cross-border law enforcement and extradition. The cultural things we talked about, unifying narratives around democracy and security. What's interesting to me is that those narratives around democracy and security over the past 6-7 years have turned into, well, your rights are not as important as the rights of the government. And we need to know what you're thinking so we can make sure that it's not dangerous.
Yep. And now it's a given. Now it's a given that you need to do that. And post COVID, nobody's going, well, we need to roll that back to the way it used to be. Now it's still, well, geez, that's a guy who didn't want to wear a mask. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Or there goes Sam. He put that Z on his Facebook. You know, we need to destroy people that think like him. You know, that kind of thing.
Well, and it's the labeling, categorizing, and then targeting. So we also had foreign policy influence where we were normalizing military interventions under humanitarian and security frameworks. So now we were saying, oh, this is for the good of these people. Syria, we're going to need to blow you to crap for your own good.
It's for your own good. That's right.
And we need to take care of this guy that refuses to use the U.S. dollar, Libya. We need to remove him because he's not using it as a standard for trade.
Yeah, I saw an interesting, like a 2-hour Gaddafi thing that basically Gaddafi was right, and that was wow. And when you think back on it, because remember what everybody thought of Muammar Gaddafi was.
Oh yeah,
you know, but that's not what they thought of him in his own land or in where he was, and you know, once again we got nothing about what the true story was. We just got, look at this evil man. He's over there.
Yeah.
We need to fix that.
But it's worse than that because
I know.
We think, oh, they can track my money here in the U.S., bank to bank, etc. No, it's a lot bigger than that. I can, regardless of the country you're in, including North Korea, understand your financial position by the money in and out. If I can control the networks that are on either side of you, right? And this is where China, Russia, North Korea, Iran are black holes, and they don't like it, right? Because they can't see all of that, and therefore they can't control it. So again, this is an overview. We're going to dive into these. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I'm going to go into, so that was all stuff that happened under Bush. But let's go into Barack Obama, because he didn't just inherit the post 9/11 world. He helped to optimize and insulate all of these globalist type ideals. He helped to insulate them from democratic pushback. In other words, people trying to remove them, or some other president coming in and being able to get rid of it, or whatever. So Obama's role in all these things we're going to discuss, because that's extremely important. I'm going to, again, highlight some bullet points. We are going to come back to them, because I then want to move on to our friend and less coherent brother, Biden, where and look at some of the things that he did, right? And I want to show one common thread through this, and then we'll go back and touch on all of them. So let's talk about Biden for a minute. Actually, you know what? Let me talk about the common thread. Let's just take immigration, right? Immigration.
Let's do it. Yep, I'm with you.
You know, pre 9/11, and now I have I have immigrated to 5 countries, right? I know what it's like to be in another country, to hold their visa. I know what the rules are like. And the rules were always pretty much the same. Go to another country, you follow their rules under their visa, you live like one of their people, except for you have restrictions, where in some countries you literally have to report in every month to the local police department to verify who you are. And you're still there. I had to sign a form that I was going to provide for myself while I was there. Couldn't access any of the social benefits. So let's look at what that was in the U.S. Very similar, pre 9/11. Post 9/11, security was a big deal. We can't let anybody in, right? Nobody can get in.
We let in 3 times as many.
Now I want you to think about the transition from that to where we were under Biden, where 20 million people come streaming across with no checks at all. And we're hearing that they're terrorists and all these other crazy people and these kinds of things. How did we get there? Would it surprise you if I said it was all part of the same program that was put in right after 9/11? Now, this is important because when we look at this one thread of immigration, think about the time span there. We went from, these terrorizers, we got to go get them, to, hey, now we've defeated this country. Now we've got all these refugees. Look at Obama telling the world, preaching to the world, you got to take these refugees. Germany, you have to change 16% of your demographic makeup. And you've got white privilege. And look at you, sitting atop your nice houses, while these poor people that we kind of bombed and blew the crap out of their society, they need a better place to go, and you have to be the one to provide it. So what we did is we destroyed those countries. We destroyed, and we talked about all of this last episode. Mm-hmm. We destroyed their governments, we destroyed their societies, their social structure, their social norms, and especially when it comes to the Middle East, their religious norms. And what did we do? We now sent them to Europe, to the United States, to anywhere where we could now absorb their culture. And you want to talk about colonialism, right? We just wiped out entire cultures, right? We've taken them in, and you got these kids that were born in the U.S. or that came over when they were like 2 or 3. Tell me they still have the same morals, ideals, and values as their parents did living in Iraq.
Nope.
Right? So all of that needs to be looked at, because the Middle East, as proven by Donald Trump when he was there last week, is a great place to live. And it feels American. And when you drive the highways of Saudi, as I have, you'll zip along, and if you didn't know better, you would think you were in the United States. You look up off the exit of the highway, there's a McDonald's sign, there's Texaco. You can't tell the difference. So, that is one thread. And I'm going to take you now deeper, a little bit wider on this one, and then the rest of them are going to be dipsticks. I want to talk about DACA. Okay, because DACA is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, otherwise known as the Dreamers Act, that Obama, we got to help the Dreamers, right? And everybody wants that.
We're still fixing the Dreamers, right?
Yeah, the Dreamer situation has turned into a nightmare, right? So remember, this focused on the children, something everybody can get behind, right? And we say, okay, let's see what the key features of DACA were when when Barack Obama instituted it. Now remember, this is a facilitation of a large program. We had already gone through and changed the nature of these countries. Now we needed to change the nature of immigration everywhere else. So under George W. Bush, we had people that were friendly to the United States that were being brought over from these countries. And we said, oh, they're going to be killed in their own country. We started using all these things like, hey, America's been there and now they've adopted these democratic ideals and now they're not welcome in their own country. We got to help them. Right? Everybody can get behind that. I'm with you, W. Bring them on over. Let's make them our neighbors and let's share some of this good old-fashioned democracy with them. Right?
Yeah.
Well, under Obama, so here's the key features of DACA. Protection from deportation. So remember, DACA doesn't provide lawful status like a green card, but it offers temporary protection from deportation for 2-year renewable periods. You just keep renewing it, right? It gives them work authorization so they can get a work permit if they apply for it. Here's the eligibility requirements. They have to be in the U.S. before age 16. They have to have continuous residence. Now, remember, this is Obama. So he was doing this, tracing it back to the year or so before George W. Bush left office. And so it was effective to June 15th, 2007. They had to enroll in school. They could have no serious criminal record. And if they did come in below the age of 16, by the time 2012 came around, they had to be under the age of 31. Well, now it no longer sounds like a bill for kids. But anyway, I digress. So here's the context. DACA was unilateral action. It was implemented under executive order, not legislation. What? You mean Trump's not the only one who did that? So it bypassed Congress. It created a precedent for executive overreach on immigration, which is why it cracks me up now to watch people screaming at, especially when we get into Biden on this issue. So we have this overreach already. Now, here's where it aligns with the globalists, right? Remember, here's what DACA aligns with. Cultural and demographic integration, dilution of national sovereignty, and immigration policy. Now, remember, it wasn't just us that was doing this. It was Canada, Sweden, Germany, right? There were all of the EU was being forced to do this. And, they were being shamed into doing it. But it was globalist alignment. Remember, nobody in those countries voted for this.
I know.
Right? So now here's the other thing. Again, it framed it, if all of this was framed in human rights and they were done as compassion because someone had just blown the living crap out of these poor people's country. Yeah, it was us, but it still needs to be fixed.
But it's always us.
Right? It's always. But when I say us, remember, under George W., we had something like 100 nations out there doing things, right? Running around fixing everybody else's problems by turning them to someone like us. Nothing says we respect your culture quite like making your culture like ours. But anyway. So critics view DACA as an amnesty without accountability. I wonder why. Of course, legal challenges have questioned its constitutionality. I wonder why, because it wasn't legislated. And the Trump administration attempted to end DACA in 2017, but for some reason the courts kept it alive.
Just
How
like
did the courts keep it alive if it was created without legislation and the courts are there to interpret the law? So so here's the bottom line. DACA represents more than just immigration relief. it reflected a shift in governance norms where bureaucratic and executive mechanisms, i.e., the presidential pen, are used to reshape the legal and cultural landscape without direct input from the electorate. And it's a prime example of how soft power is used to advance globalist social policy under the guise of compassion. And I heard a sermon once of along the same line that compassion is sometimes the easiest way to get by your little receptors there where you're normally astute, right? So one quick thing about Biden's use of DACA. And when we think about Biden's use of DACA, what did we see? He didn't create DACA, but he strategically used and expanded it that went way beyond Obama. And remember, now if we had a chart, and I have a chart over with me, but I don't have the ability to share it with you. But if we looked at which of these policies were globalist aligned, which were American aligned, or which were neutral, like is this pro-American is all we're really saying. The short answer is no, not in anyone's wildest imagination could this be construed as pro-American. And I've often asked my friends that align to the Democrat Party, like, can you name one reason that was ever given to open our borders? No, because there was no reason given. And it doesn't align to anything that we do anymore. Like there wasn't any global war that these people were escaping from. At least Bush and Obama had an excuse. So this is clearly 100% aligned to globalism. So let's look at what he did. Through executive order, I might add, he increased access. He expanded eligibility criteria. In other words, this wasn't just for young people. This was for whoever happened to be there on the other side of the border fence. Well, wasn't
no
really
fence, just point. The other border.
Right? Yeah. He, instead of pushing Congress to pass permanent immigration reform, Biden then used executive power to do all of these changes. And remember, we now know that he wasn't in charge most of the time. So who's doing this? Well, we know that it's the folks that were put in there by Obama and Hillary, etc. When efforts to codify DACA stalled in Congress, he just continued to do it, despite clear judicial and constitutional concerns. So again, we have people that are really upset about Donald Trump doing all this stuff, and he's going to blow right past our laws, and it's going to be fascism. Oh, you mean whatever Obama and Biden did wasn't? Why is this different? So in 2021
it's different because here the judicial branch isn't backing Trump, but they definitely back.
Well, remember, it's not the entire judicial branch. Remember, people are shopping for the judges they want. They're moving stuff to other courts where they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But so anyway, in 2021 and 2022, federal courts ruled DACA was unlawful, and they cited Obama's use of executive action as overreach. So what happened? Okay, 2021 and 2022, the federal courts hand down, it is unlawful. What did Biden do? He kept going. He just called it something different. He formed it into a formal federal rule. Rather than an executive memo, he moved it to a rule in the Department of Immigration,
Yeah,
attempting
you
to
mean
sidestep
an
it.
administrative regulation, you mean.
A chevron, right?
Yeah.
Part of the Chevron doctrine, which was also knocked down. So now here's what he did. So he then proposed a pathway to citizenship for all dreamers, right? Far beyond DACA's original population, and he reinterpreted existing immigration law. Right? He was just shoving in everything he possibly could. Then he tied DACA to a broader globalist immigration. So they pushed a narrative. This is the first time this has ever happened, where he pushed a narrative of universal human rights that override national borders. So why do we need all these borders? And you started hearing this narrative that was starting to float around the Democrat Party for a while. And don't worry, we're going to get to the narratives that floated around the Republican Party under Bush, right? Where the Republicans were like, "Oh yeah, I'm just gobbling this up because this is our guy talking." But anyway, the narrative of universal human rights. Now, part of this, again, we went through this in the last episode. People, when they travel, expect to carry their rights with them. So they go to a foreign country, they do something stupid, and then they're like, oops, we don't have the right to be stupid here in this country. We do back in the U.S., do drugs or whatever. So then, now the narrative on immigration has changed, that it's a global good rather than a sovereign choice. So now this matches the worldview of unelected global bodies, i.e., the UN and the World Economic Fund.
Yep.
So, bottom line, Biden abused DACA, not by dismantling it, even after it was declared illegal, but by entrenching and expanding it beyond what Congress or the courts authorized, beyond what Obama did, beyond what George W. Bush did that facilitated all of it. So he turned what was originally a temporary. So remember what Barack Obama did. Barack Obama was like, we got to take in these poor Syrian refugees and all these people that have been displaced by war, and we need something in place. So what that could be? Well, let me just write something here with my pen, and we'll make it happen.
And then why don't we
all of this
create
without
a bunch
a
more
single
war?
vote? Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and that's what we were getting into in those other ones. But all of this without a single vote cast by the American people. Did you vote for this under Bush? No. Did you vote for it under Obama? No. Did you vote for it under Biden? No. So if you didn't, then why are you out there defending it? Like, what is the benefit of it? Like, America has literally been sagging and dragging for the last 20 years since 9/11, and people are out there defending it as if everybody else deserves a right to be economically free and be happy, but we don't, right? Which just goes back to the narratives of privilege and all of these other things that you hear out there. So, and as you can tell, I am not in the least bit sympathetic towards any of this. So let's go back. Remember, and by the way, does that thread make sense? Because we talked about it all the way from George Bush, how he triggered it, all the way through to Biden. That one thread of just immigration. And remember, that wasn't even one of the major categories that we talked about. That's just immigration, which is a subset of cultural and ideological influence, one of the 8. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So let's go back now. Are you starting to see, though, when people say, and remember, I said this back in episode 1, when you asked me to come on and talk about 9/11. I said the biggest problem with people thinking about 9/11 as being anything other than a tragedy is they're like, well, what we gain? We just, we just went to war and all of these things. No, it was a major global pivot. There was an entire new order in the world that started to change because of it. So let's go back. Okay, let's list the 8 here. Increased international security, cooperation. I'm going to fly through some of these because we're going to get into topics and come back to it. But intelligence sharing. Now, we talked last time about Five Eyes, which is the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And do you remember what Five Eyes is? It's basically where I can't legally spy on you as a government in my country. So if I'm in New Zealand and I'm the government of New Zealand, I can't spy on you, but I can ask the Americans to do it for me, and then I can get the report from them. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Isn't that something that's absurd in and of itself?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, just now when we say intelligence sharing, everybody's all for it. Oh yeah, we need security. We can't have these terrorizers running around, killing people. Well, we'll just have another government spy on you just in case we don't like you too. Financial surveillance. We established the Financial Action Task Force, which is a significant tightening of international money transfer monitoring to track terror funding and money laundering. Remember, they came out with something at that time, and you may remember this, where they said anyone who has over $1,200 could actually start their own army, and they wanted to make sure that they knew who had money and who didn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Counterterrorism alliances, expansion of global counterterrorism initiatives. This includes NATO-led military interventions. Do you remember the guy that was back under Clinton had to go put on the blue UN hat to go to Mogadishu, and he didn't want to.
Yeah.
And he was prosecuted and all that stuff under Clinton. But under Obama, there was a full integration of Obama. Under Bush, there was a full integration of units, right? So you had to obey, even if it wasn't a UN thing, you had to obey a British colonel if he was assigned to your unit. So that's the increased international security cooperation. I want to jump down because 2 is expansion of global surveillance networks. We talked about the strengthening of multilateral institutions, but I want to skip down. We talked about economic integration, and this one's important because, again, a lot of people today keep talking about how Trump is changing trade. So post 9/11, economic uncertainty. Remember, it would cause an economic crash globally. It pushed stronger international economic coordination through the World Trade Organization, the G7, and the G20. And they also, for the first time globally, implemented crisis-driven economic policies. So what that means is that we were able to enhance a central bank, a global central bank, right, essentially, paving the way for collective responses to later crises, i.e., the 2008 financial crisis. That's a perfect opportunity to test that out. So, remember, 2008, like, we're still right there on the edge of the Bush. I mean, all of this is under Bush. So we have these global economic policies, and I'm gonna pop down and read a little bit more thread here on the one I did for Barack Obama, which on the economic policy side, because it's important to understand where this went. Let me see what I did with that here. I made a little table if I can find it. Okay. So
Are you reading? Or did
I'm
I
looking
lose
at
you?
my
Oh,
I have a table. I have a table that I'm looking at. Um, when you think about things like Paris Accord, these kinds of things where we've got now these new accords in, that was the big deal under Obama. He formalized all of those. Um, I can't find my specific list on that one. But when you think about the economic side of it, remember that Barack Obama kept our GDP growth at between 1.2% to about 2% for 8 years.
yeah.
So what that means is that your salary was, especially when they were still printing money for more wars and sending people to Afghanistan during his tenure, it was becoming worth less and less and less. You were basically not growing at all. Like your income wasn't growing. So that's an important call out because this economic integration. So we all remember what happened in Greece. And just to highlight, their currency basically failed and everybody had to bail them out. But one of the big questions was, well, how do we normalize their currency with the rest of the EU?
Boy, that screwed the rest
Right?
of us. I
Because their
used to
money isn't
like
worth
going
what?
to. I loved going to Greece. It was, boy, you were rich as hell when you went over there. And then
Yeah.
post EC, suddenly it's horribly expensive there. There's zero
Yep.
benefit to. I'm not saying there's zero benefit to going. It's a fantastic place, but now you're paying $80 a bag to take your luggage there, just like everywhere
Yeah.
else. And instead of, it used to be
Yeah.
for $80 you could live there for 2 weeks, and
Hmm.
now you can't live. It's just bad as Germany, you know.
Well, but how do you do that? How do you normalize? Like if you're trying to integrate global economies, like all these nations together, think about how we do it in the States. We're basically saying you don't have your own like currency drivers. And so from that perspective, the US had to slow down to let everybody catch up. And Obama was the face of that, where everybody on the bus, we were all singing songs and talking about rainbows while he drove the bus at a snail's pace down the road and let everybody else catch up so that we could normalize currencies across the globe. And that's
Yeah, but
important
what's
because
the
that's
benefit of that? What did that help?
that helped if you're all part of the same economy. See, this is why they don't like Trump, because what he's saying is we're going to make America great. We're going to make the American economy great. We're going to reignite it. And what's that going to do? That's going to cause everybody else to act. Remember, most of these other countries are socialist. They're actually going to have to start becoming producers. If you're all on the same even keel, you don't have to work as hard to maintain your standard of living. But if and maybe this isn't a helpful analogy, but maybe it is. I don't know. Um, you know, the two guys are walking in the woods, and the bear starts chasing them, and the one guy says, "I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you."
Yeah.
Right? This is very similar in that when you have everything focused on the U.S. economy, the other economies in some way are not. If you're trying to have a global government now, remember that this is all from the globalist perspective. How do I have a normalized global government without having all of these things in sync? Military, economies, culture, etc., etc. We've got to have the same level if you look at how Greece was assimilated into the EU, that those economic, I would say, ties have to be equalized one way or the other. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. I remember what happened. I watched what happened,
Yeah.
and it very much hurt Germany at that time, because Germany was the
Mhm.
single greatest economy in Europe, and Greece was the worst. And so basically,
Yep.
you take 10% of Germany's GDP and send it down to Greece, basically to get them on whatever standard that they were trying to apply, and austerity measures weren't working because Greece was given
Mhm.
huge pensions to people, and nobody worked in Greece.
Yeah, it was everybody just sat around.
Everybody sat around in that beautiful climate and didn't do anything. And the Germans were very industrious, and the Germans were there was a lot of complaining about having to front Greece, and so there was a lot of pressure on Greece
Mhm.
to limit some of what they were getting. So I remember how it happened, and I never saw it as uh, a U.S. driven attempt to
Oh, that one
equalize.
wasn't. Absolutely.
Yeah,
That was EU
but
there, but
I
yeah.
can see it on the global level. I certainly get that. I didn't realize that Obama had as big an influence as he did, and I'd want to
Mhm.
read some more about that and figure out where that came from. But I
Well,
could see the point absolutely. So
yeah, and my question for the listeners out there is, was this pro-American? Like when
no,
you
hell no.
and there was a lot of outsourcing of our factories at that time, right? Um,
Well, and artificial
all of these
inflation
kinds of
of the
things.
service economy, like insurance, legal,
Hmm.
financial, that all of these things are counted in GDP, and in the rest of the world, they're not, and or
Right.
counted much differently, the way they count their GDP, and so our GDP was artificially high anyway, and
Yeah.
and with a
We had to get
loss of
everybody on
all.
the same.
Yep,
Yeah. Well,
interesting stories.
and that yeah, and at some point we'll have to, maybe not tonight, but in some future time, you can see a pattern here emerge, especially when we talk about COVID, because COVID was another one where right after COVID, you see Biden just going crazy, just as Bush did. Bush went crazy with all the stuff he was doing, including surveillance, including all these things we're talking about,
Hmm.
right? What was it? $14 trillion in extra spending. And we were already way up there. So our money's becoming worth less and less. So anyway, I did a deeper dive into that one. I dipped into that one, and um, we're gonna definitely touch on that one in the future. So we got global legal harmonization where legal cooperation, right? There's a European arrest warrant standard that becomes kind of like globalized. Terrorism definitions are now um, set across the globe, which may seem fundamental, but that's what happens after 9/11. And then we start looking at these cultural and ideological influences again, unified messaging around freedom, democracy, security, right? We keep hearing all those words. And that's where we also get this soft power expansion, where Western cultural exports like media, technology, education programs, like when we heard that USAID was funding Sesame Street, Trans Sesame Street in Iraq, well, did it surprise anyone that they had Sesame Street in the first place? Right?
Yeah.
It should be surprising, right? But this all happened at the end of Bush's. Remember, we're still talking in the Bush administration, and then we're talking about what Obama did, etc. Those people that didn't like Bush in the Middle East were able to accept a lot of things because of Barack Hussein Obama. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna stop you for just a minute and take a little bit of time to say that we are 1 hour in. That we have. I don't think I mentioned it at the beginning of the show. This is a 2 hour program. We will be going all the way to 11 o'clock, and want to let people know that if anybody wanted to call in, 573-746-8020, be happy to hear from you, and we could continue on in that topic. And we are going to press on. I'm with Matthew Von Trapp, who happens to be my brother, as well as a gifted analyst of these sorts of things. And I think what you're providing us is quite interesting, Matthew. So proceed.
Alrighty. Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here. As I said, going through these, we've got 8 like key categories of effects that we're talking about, and we're just touching on number 7 and 8, and these are all within the Bush administration still. So when you think about 7 being justification for foreign intervention and regime change, it's now saying that we have the right as a, we're starting to build this right as a global society to go in and intervene and do a regime change. So when we don't do it, and this is what the unspoken part of it, right? If we have that right and we went and did it in Afghanistan, we did it in Syria, Yemen, all of these places like the Arab Spring, we've done it all over the place as a result of this. You have to wonder, why don't we do it for some places? North Korea, Iran, Hamas, right? Why don't we bring those people in and say, hey, so, and we talked about this in one of the previous shows, because now this also included, and when we talk about the justification for foreign intervention, this was something new because it included a policy of preemptive action. In other words, you don't have to actually be terrorizers yet. As long as we think you are, we can go after you. And that included Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and then Syria later on. Remember, they didn't do anything. There was no action against us when we went after Libya, when we went after Iraq, Afghanistan. Like, okay, 9/11 happened. Let's go get Afghanistan. Like, we're in Afghanistan the next week. What's in Afghanistan? I don't know. Several of those terrorizers were from Saudi Arabia. And then they had camps. Yes, there's camps in Afghanistan.
That's right.
Right. And oh, by the way, we know about those camps because we built them for the Mujahideen in the 80s. So we know.
And we funded them.
Like, we not only funded them, but we funded Osama bin Laden under George H. Bush as director of the CIA. Osama bin Laden was on the payroll as the head of the Mujahideen against the Soviet army.
Yeah.
So I remember they popped up on the screen a diagram of a tunnel system, and I was with, I can't remember. There were maybe it was some older ladies that were in their like 70s or 80s from church or something. And one is like, "Wow, isn't this technology amazing? We know exactly what they're, I think maybe it wasn't technology, maybe it was intelligence." I said, "Yeah, do you know why we know?" Because we built them.
That's right.
We built those.
I think
And
I
it was
dug one
such
of those
shock.
tunnels.
No.
I could have been there with a shovel.
No.
That's possible.
And they were like hating on me, these old ladies, as if I wasn't patriotic.
Yeah.
But remember, this list came out on September 12th, 2001, which later became Which Path to Persia in 2009, a 174-page document, and listed all of these countries. And one of our generals went on TV and said, I have a piece of paper in my hand that says we're going to war against these, I can't remember if it was 11 or 13 countries. So we used it absolutely as justification. And the general was like, what have any of these countries done? Right. I'm more than happy to go to war. Just tell me what it's over. And people were speculating. Oh, it's over oil. Nope, it's not over oil. So political influences also falls under that category because we're talking about regime change. So this enabled Western countries to reshape political landscapes in the Middle East. So they were allowed to expand political and economic influence under a security and stabilization banner. Right? So now you see Qatar, the UAE, Saudi, Oman, Bahrain, and Kuwait, right? But for sure Qatar, if I hadn't mentioned that.
Yep.
So that political influence now you see countries like Qatar aspiring to be the Switzerland of the Middle East, right? So we give them something to look up to. And finally, number 8 is the technological control. So I was in Iraq, and the company I was with, the Department of Defense contractor there, we built several detectors that had all kinds of capabilities. But the most important thing I had already spoken of earlier is we put in phone systems that allowed supercomputers to connect to them, right? That seemed to be the most important thing we were doing there. But this is an expansion of global standards in telecommunications. So we have to have certain standards in order for everything to run through our frameworks, right? In order to grab that content.
Yeah.
Right. And so there were now global standards for that. And that really comes into play as we look at what Barack Obama did. I'm going to skip ahead to some things under Barack Obama because I want to be able to talk about some of this stuff. Do you know what a fusion center is?
A fusion center.
By chance?
I don't know what the connotation is in power. Like, is it electrical power, or what are we talking about?
So these fusion centers, they're remember the Department of Homeland Security was instituted under Bush and under Barack Obama. We now have this creation of what I would call the Homeland Security Industrial Complex, where we've got the Department of Homeland Security, the TSA, which was new. We had mass funding of this security infrastructure. So the budget under Obama, they increased the Department of Homeland Security budget to $60 billion by 2015. Now, these fusion centers are domestic data sharing hubs that are located in a lot of the big cities. What they do is they collect and analyze information on potential threats in the cities or in surrounding areas. They facilitate real-time intelligence sharing between federal agencies like the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and also state and local law enforcement. And they use open source data, i.e. Facebook, like social media monitoring, and they combine this with things like informant, these threat bulletins. And those threat bulletins can be to anybody, to law enforcement, to the public, whatever. Right? So here's the concern. Mass surveillance of innocent Americans. Right? They have been caught spying on political activists, religious groups, journalists, and ordinary citizens who have no connection to crime or terrorism. Right? And those cases are already documented. They have very vague definitions of suspicious activity. Now, Sam, as you were defending innocent people, or maybe they were less than innocent, but they weren't quite as guilty as the police claimed, some of these definitions are important because suspicious activity, when a police officer says, I saw some suspicious activity over there, so I went and talked to this guy.
Yep.
Right? Well, how do you define that? Right? And so they were actually using the term suspicious activity to allow them to track peaceful dissent, like protests. They would also go into what they considered to be unusual financial activity, quote unquote, which means they just didn't know what it was, so they spied on you about why you had money.
Yeah.
So now remember, there's no consistent federal oversight or state oversight because they just plop these things down in the middle of these states. And a lot of them operate under state level law enforcement, which makes accountability real murky because if it's a federal agent, does he have to report something to the state? So in 2012, there was a Senate, I won't call it an investigation, it was a Senate study. And that report found that many of these fusion center reports, like all the information they were gathering and sending to places, were oftentimes irrelevant and mostly unconstitutional, right? So they had these as gateways, though, to federal databases, such as those used by the FBI, DHS, NSA. And what this means is that state and local police can now feed information upstream into federal surveillance systems without warrants.
Wow.
Right? That's a huge deal. So my question is where is the uprising of the people saying this is unconstitutional?
Well, because we never heard of them. And
yeah,
I just did a quick search and it gave me this thing, dive deeper in AI mode, it said to me. And that's just an AI Google overview as on what a fusion center is. It's a crucial component of Homeland Security efforts. See how they twist it already into something good? It's a crucial component, primarily focused on information sharing and analysis among various law enforcement and security agencies, And then it gives you a list of like 10 things of what they do. And here, down at the very bottom, it says, note, while fusion centers play a vital role in Homeland Security, they also face criticism regarding their effectiveness in preventing terrorism and potential privacy concerns.
Potential. Well, I think the bigger issue is that if you go to the UK, you can be arrested for a comment you made here in the United States on your social media page. Why? Because remember the 5 eyes? Now let's start combining some of these systems together. So I make a statement here about some political something going on in the UK. Get on a plane, go to London, I'm arrested. And remember, they wanted to arrest Elon Musk.
Yeah, right? I remember.
And this is why J.D. Vance is standing up at the AI security conference in Munich and basically says, we don't even know if you're our allies because you don't even share the same principles as we do of freedom of speech.
They're going to arrest him the next time he shows up.
They are. Well, what's interesting is everybody out in the crowd is shocked. Why? Because they're like, well, wait a minute. We bought into the whole mindset that the Bushes sold us, and now look, now you're punishing us. Right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about NDAA clauses. Okay. And when we think about NDAA clauses, and I've got to scroll down here because I actually made actually pasted some of my things here at the bottom so I could get to them quicker, but I have to scroll through like 50 pages. Give me 1 second. Because when you think about surveillance, and there still may be people that are looking at all this and saying, man, he's spending a lot of time on surveillance and all of these things, right? And yeah, it's true, but what about what it means from a global level? Can they really bring you into a global, like, I would say, framework outside of your culture, your country? Well, yeah, we just said you could get arrested in the UK for something. You stayed here in the US, which is a freedom of yours because of that intelligence sharing. So let's talk about some of these a little bit deeper. NDAA clauses. Now, what's NDAA, first of all? It's the National Defense Authorization Act. It happens every year. We authorize the Defense Department to spend so much on, weapons and everything else, right? And it's policies as well. So it's standard military funding, most of it, right? Now, there's certain controversial, far-reaching clauses, and there was one that was really highlighted last year, where, well, I'll get into that one, but basically the one last year was, and I can't remember which clause that was, basically said that the U.S. military is obligated to fight with the police if there is an quote-unquote uprising. And this can be anything from a Hamas, a pro-Palestinian march, to some of the red MAGA stuff. It doesn't matter. And I think that's the thing that people need to know. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican listening to this, the definition is the same. The police call in the military.
Yeah, but it wouldn't include Black Lives Matter. They're exempt from everything.
Who's president, right?
Yeah, they never count.
Now, here's the key thing, right? Because, and this is something, I tried to find the video from Rachel Maddow, and this was in 2012, where she went off on Barack Obama. Because NDA clauses that raise concern is, one of them is the indefinite detention clause. Now, this allows the U.S. military to detain individuals indefinitely without charge or trial if they are deemed to be associated with terrorism. This includes U.S. citizens captured on U.S. soil. Period.
Huh.
The U.S. military can come get you. They can throw you in a jail. They never have to charge you. They never have to send you to a trial. And all they have to do is say, you're a terrorizer. And sorry, I keep using the Bush term because
I remember.
He was such an idiot, man. Yeah. I think he just pretended to be an idiot, but he had those terms,
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah. But what else does it do? It suspends habeas corpus protections. And what's funny is when I was doing a little bit of search in this, it says critics say this violates constitutional due process. You think?
Yeah.
Completely removes the Constitution.
Well, because you're only a critic. I mean,
Now remember, this was under Obama though, so it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay because we're all unicorns and rainbows here, right? So then it also includes an expansion of the National Surveillance Authority. So these NDAA bills have embedded clauses that fund or authorize surveillance programs like PRISM or X-Keyscore. And when we get into PRISM and X-Keyscore, I'm going to go on to this and then I'm going to get into those a little more deeply. Because what most people don't like about what's been happening to us is the fact that governments can go in and surveil us on anything, right?
Yeah.
But this is often, again, it's vague cybersecurity or defense modernization language. Like, oh, if this person meets this criteria and they kind of look like a terrorist, then, stuff that anyone could fit into that description. So guess what else it did? And now this is in 2017. This was the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act.
Yeah.
Now remember, in 2012 is when it first connected people to social media platforms. And that's when we started seeing requests being made to social media platforms for direct connections by, 2017 changed that. Because now they could say, hey, we've got to stop this foreign propaganda and disinformation. Now, what this did is created a global engagement center. Global. So someone in New Zealand is looking at your posts, and they're deeming it fake news. And this is the thing that Rubio was talking about just a few weeks ago. He talked about how this happened, and I recommend you go in. It was one of Trump's cabinet meetings where he talks about this in detail of how they started dismantling this. Right?
Yeah, I have that.
Oh, you have?
Yep.
You know which one it is?
I'm pretty sure I do, and I could probably play it for you.
Play it. I can talk through this next bullet point if you need some time.
Well, we'll talk through it, and I'll round it up for us because I do have it.
Okay. Now this is the one I was talking about with military. So this is military use on domestic soil. This is this blurred the lines of posse comitatus, which allows military involvement in domestic policing during, quote, national emergencies. Now remember, this was outlawed in our Constitution.
Is
right?
This the one that you sent me when he was actually sitting next to? Or is this because the one you sent me says decisions on the past were based on is it good for the world? Now they're based on is it good for America? But I listened to that whole thing a couple of times for different shows, and I don't remember that saying anything about this topic.
I don't think it was that one. I don't think it was that one. I think it was just the cabinet meeting where. Yeah.
So. Then I don't have the right cabinet meeting then. So sorry about that.
Okay.
I thought because you had sent it to me that perhaps it was the one.
No. So
yeah.
So the fifth part of the NDAAs is that some NDAAs they greenlit covert ops or foreign interventions. They were pre-authorization for foreign conflict. Let that sink in for a minute. No presidential order needed. No Congress declaration of war. They are saying you have authority to do this without congressional approval, without the president. Now I would ask, do we still have a government? If all of these things are being done, remember, U.S. aid was distributing money by themselves. Like, who is it that declared that the kids in Iraq needed to learn about transgenderism? It wasn't. No one voted for that. There was no congressman. If we have our own Congress and we have, so we got the House, the Senate, the judiciary, the president. We've got all that stuff. But all of these things are already pre-authorized, and they're somewhere else, and there's who's controlling it? So all of these things. Now, this is why it matters. This is just one bill. And this is a routine bill for and it's become a vehicle for expanding federal authority, often under the radar. And many of these are justified under counterterrorism, but here's what else they justify: mass surveillance, domestic military involvement, narrative control, suspension of civil liberties. I can think of several constitutional violations there.
Yeah, you think?
Right?
Mm.
So I guess what I'm saying is, if Bush, Obama, and then Biden were all in alignment, and all of these things were built by Bush, entrenched by Obama, expanded by Biden, where is our Constitution? Where are we in this? Right? Where are we going as a people?
Well, and how did we get here post 9/11? It's
yeah.
Because your initial question to me was what is the benefit of people don't want to believe that 9/11 was an inside job, of course. Nobody wants to believe that. But when you look at was it just a global apparatus using the circumstances to their benefit, which is, by the way, everywhere on the internet is it's put out that way, not the other way around, that this was intentionally used to create the scenario so they could get the rest. Okay. Everybody else just saying, well, the new act that allowed the government to surveil you was put in, and all of these sweeping changes took place by Congress quickly because they saw a need the day after it started. But what you had said was that they had written, I had some of what you had given me was that they had written the
Patriot Act before.
The Patriot Act beforehand. Now, everywhere you look
Patriot
online
Act was there.
says no, that's not the case. And everywhere. So when you go and you would do a search on that, it says conspiracy theory nuts say that it was written beforehand, but that's not true.
Yeah, there's if the first thing, and we talked about this in episode 3, and there was, I think it was even Bill Kristol and some of these other guys that were literally as a part of that think tank that put that document out, and he was on TV talking about it. But you'll still find that it was that these things are out there saying, well, we think that's a conspiracy theory. Yeah, well, then go back to Billy Crystal and ask him why he said it, because he was on the committee that wrote it. Couple of quick things. I want to jump ahead a little bit because I don't want people to get lost in the mess here of what this is. But I first of all want to zoom out and say, again, just a quick review of what we've talked about: economic policies with where all of the currencies had to be normalized. We have policies with immigration where immigration has to be normalized, where you're now a global citizen. You have a right to come into the United States according to certain parties here in the U.S. And what is done in order to get these things in place. Well, let me say military and surveillance and all of those things. What's used to get those in place are executive orders, expansion by pen, and it was done by Bush, Obama, Biden, and we have to ask ourselves: is that what Trump is doing? Is he also expanding this? Well, I wish I could show you a little chart here. So, long and short of it is that everything. Let me list those 8 again: surveillance expansion, legal overreach and Patriot Act stuff, overseas military intervention, border laxity, massive foreign aid, and NGOs, institutional globalism, narrative control and censorship, and economic displacement. Those were all key things of Biden, right? Of how he expanded on what was already there of those 8 that we talked about. And actually, I read them in reverse. I'm sorry,
but that's okay. Is Trump reversing any of that, or is he expanding it?
Exactly. Is he reversing it? So what is Trump actually doing? He's saying, no, you can't do this. We're going to get rid of all these people, and they're trying to stop him, obviously.
Yeah.
When it comes to overseas military intervention, what's he saying? No, we're not going to do it. When it comes to borders and
but he's real wishy-washy on that. He's wishy-washy on the no, we're not going to do it. And I've been complaining about that on my side for several since he took office.
Yeah, I think the reason he's doing that, at least from what I can tell, is because he's still in the art of the deal, quote unquote, trying to negotiate. And
see, people tell me that, and I don't know that I believe that.
I was just about to say the same thing. I don't know. I haven't seen the art of the deal, so it's not so clear in my mind. What I would say is I think it's dangerous to play a position you don't believe in, where you're just saying it to get someone to do something else. I think that type of behavior could lead to unexpected consequences.
Well, I don't like that he keeps on weaving back and forth between the neocon or the Democrat, the same old, and forging his own path and doing something different. And I don't like the weaving back and forth. I think he needs to pick one or the other. And if he picks the neocon, Ukraine is his, he bought it. Syria is his, he bought it. And anything else that is going on, he will have bought it. It is no longer Biden's mistakes. They will be his if he proceeds down the neocon sanction the world path. Anybody we hate, we sanction. And I don't know. I've got real worry on that side, and somewhat even to my detriment, because it is constantly out there, and I get frustrated that he won't pick one.
I agree. Here's what I worry about. At the end of the last episode, we stated clearly that this was globalism versus nationalism. This isn't Republicans versus Democrats. This is globalists versus nationalists. We either are going to protect our national sovereignty and move ahead, or not, right?
Yep.
Now, it's turmoil either way. And the biggest problem I have is I don't see Trump clearly articulating that.
Nope.
Right? When it was globalists, literally globalists, that said in the 2020 election cycle, oh, he will not be president. Why do I have a guy from France or Switzerland or wherever he is telling me, nope, that guy is not going to be president? Why do I have that? Why do I hear that on the TV? Like, that is the most absurd thing I've ever heard, is some rich billionaire living in Switzerland telling the rest of us that we won't have this guy as a president. I don't care if I support him or not.
Yeah.
Right? So the real question is, how much globalism is too much? How much is not enough? What do we really need? And it goes back to being able to trust the sources of this. Because we all have to have, like, we all want to be able to travel. Speaking of France, we want to go see the Eiffel Tower, or we want to go, to Norway or Denmark or somewhere. It would be great to be able to go with our passport and feel like we could be treated well, right? None of us are making trips to North Korea, particularly because we may not come out.
Mm-hmm.
So we do want some form of globalism where we want to be able to share experiences and invite people here and do tourism and stuff like that. But at what point are we no longer, and this was in episode 1 where we said, what point are we no longer our own country? So I happen to believe that the United States is a special place. And I've been to 56 countries. I think you and I talked about this. I happen to think that the Constitution is something special. And that unlike Barack Obama, who said we should look at changing this Constitution, it's getting in the way, right? I don't believe that. I believe that it is a framework for freedom, but the very people, and I remember it was Barack Obama who went into Syria, blew the living crap out of those people, and then said we need to care for these refugees, and starting to shame all of us into not taking refugees, right? And stating we have a refugee problem. This is also the same guy that did that with our laws. He, with his executive pen, created chaos with these new rules and DACA and everything else that he was putting out there. And then he comes back and says, this Constitution is just not working for us. Well, you think? Because you're not paying attention to it. So what I'm saying, and one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that we talk about all these things, is that I want people to look at what really happened at 9/11. It was a global pivot. And it didn't appear to be a global pivot because all of our allies were pivoting with us. But global trade changed. Culture changed. All of the things that we see Trump doing, quote unquote, were all done during or just after 9/11. Like some of them within a day or two.
Yeah.
And if you're someone right now living in the Middle East, the world that was yours and that you understood before 9/11 is completely different. Qatar has something like 6 or 7 universities there from the U.S. Like, these people are now westernized.
Well,
and it's a big deal. Real big deal. So, anyway,
well,
I kind of
no doubt it's a different world, and it's something that when we first started tonight's program was how do we now say that it's an inside job? Is it only because of the result of what was resulted, or is and I'm very much interested in getting to the unloading of the scrap from the World Trade Center into China, and from reviewing that video of the guy who had the uh, the video that you shared with me, the one of 9. But now I'm afraid to put it out there on my Facebook and
No,
say,
now
here's where it is. If everybody
now you
wants
can
to
share
see
it from
it,
there's a place online that I'll show you where to share it from. But you know what's interesting? So to your point, I think on the one hand we can say, so you asked the question, can we say it was an inside job because of the result of what resulted? Well, let me flip the coin around and ask a question to everybody out there. Have you ever seen a terrorist attack? We've had a lot of terrorist attacks in the world that brought this much. I've given threads through 20 years of presidents. Now, I skipped Trump specifically because he tried to roll every one of these back. Right? But essentially 24 years of presidents. Have you ever seen a terrorist attack that caused not just a pivot, but a growth on that pivot, and then an expansion of that pivot for 20-something years? Why didn't we see? I mean, we've seen tragedies before, like the space shuttle Challenger explosion.
yeah.
Right?
Well, but Matt, I keep going back to the art. Did they just take an opportune time and an opportune scenario, or did somebody together, CIA or otherwise, sit down and direct who's going to take what airplane and what route that plane is going to take and how it's going to get to where it's going on the side of the U.S.? Because remember, we're getting released in little trickles. It was kind of a nothing sandwich, at least with respect to what you got from, at least in my view anyway, for the JFK files. Very, very, very little has come of that. We release it to a series of journalists who are going to write a book, blah, blah, blah. But what about the rest of us? Where's the beef is my question.
Yeah.
And
well, this is where it really starts to lend itself to get into the details of 9/11, because now we already talked about all of these things that changed, and we've even categorized it and showed the growth of it. But when we start looking at the details and we say, okay, day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld announced that there's like trillions of dollars missing. And the next day, the people that were investigating it are killed. But did you know that the Bush family had roughly $250 million in
puts,
in bonds that were due, that were to come due in the month of October, I believe. Their and we'll have to get it. I'm just going to do high level. I'm going to do generic, right? The place that held the debt and all of the financial information was on like the 82nd floor of the World Trade Center that blew up with the first plane.
Yeah.
Like the coincidence of that and the $1 trillion missing. When you look at those and you go, wow, that was super beneficial to the Bush family.
Yeah, but when I read those, so when I did it, I went all of the things that you had said that you put out there, and I went out and did a search that said did Rumsfeld admit that $2.3 trillion was missing from the Pentagon in the days before 9/11? And the AI again says, no, he did
No.
not reveal the Pentagon had lost 2.3 trillion. And basically, he had on September 10, he did say that the Pentagon's financial systems were outdated and unable to track 2.3 trillion in transactions. That's right. And it was this figure wasn't new information and had been previously mentioned in a February 2000 audit report in testimony before a congressional task force. And again, here's the safety feature they provide for us, because God knows Google wouldn't want us to believe in conspiracy theories. It says this statement has become the basis for various conspiracy theories linking it to 9/11, which are unfounded, it says. And so, and then, you have this other deep dive part. And so I'm interested
I'm glad
in knowing
you get into that.
more.
I'm glad you get into that, because one of the episodes I want to do is about the news media and the storytelling. Because remember I said earlier I wanted to go back and find the video of Rachel Maddow.
Yeah, I did a search for that too, and I couldn't find it.
I found the video placeholder, but no video for Rachel Maddow going over Barack Obama's indefinite detention. Remember, Barack Obama's up there talking about indefinite detention.
Yeah.
When you think about the things that have gone missing off of the internet,
which is a lot, it's tons.
Well, think about what you're using. You just said you're using Google to find it. And remember, and you said you used AI. And how is AI trained? So these are all things we need to get into, because one of the things I said as we went forward, as we started the beginning of this, was you have to know your sources for where you're getting your information, and getting your information from a reliable source is key. I remember after it was the elections when, was it 2012 where it was Romney against Obama? What year was that?
Wasn't that 2008?
Maybe that was earlier. I can't remember. Maybe it was 2008. There was a very brief article that came out that talked about the statistics of one precinct in Pennsylvania where they had where basically Romney, his team, had statistics that showed that he was going to, that he had a 56% of the vote or something like that, 58% of the vote.
Yeah, it was 2012, by the way.
It was 2012. Okay, good. When the votes were counted, he had something like 108 votes out of several thousand. Right? And the reason why that number was significant is because they also said that Barack Obama had received something like 108% or 104% or whatever. It was almost the same number. Well, 108% of the vote, which means more people voted than were on the rolls, right?
Yeah.
I saw that when I was in the Middle East, and I went back and tried to find that just months later. Couldn't find it. So these are things that I think we're going to get into when we start talking about this, because what you're going to do is people are going to go out there and say, hey, what exactly happened? But I'm going to show techniques on how to get some of these old videos. Remember, I told you the one that got me in trouble with Microsoft, and I can show you places on the internet that have the original videos. So when you see Rumsfeld standing up and giving the press conference himself the day before 9/11, and the context of it, it's a little bit different, and some of that's out there, but you need the full context. So having said that, I do think we need I think the next episode we do on the details of 9/11, like how the buildings fell at these free fall speeds and those kind of things.
Yeah.
I think we need to get into some of those anomalies.
So that video, can I put that video, say it's out on my, put the link out on somewhere for people to watch it,
Oh yeah. That link I sent you, that's okay.
That one is no danger, right? The 45-minute one, the first guy, yeah?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
That's fine. And I've got the one that has all 9 videos.
Yeah, there's a long one that you sent me too that's like 4 hours and something as well.
Yeah.
That one I have not watched.
That's important, because what happens when we start looking at 9/11, this guy, so just to fill everybody in on this, the guy who makes these videos is Colin something or other. I can't remember his last name. He's a special effects expert, and it has his own special effects studio, at least at the time he made the video, in Hollywood. And what he did is he went back through all of the theories about 9/11. So, like, for example, when you have kerosene that explodes in a building, kerosene never gets hot enough to burn steel. It can't burn steel, literally.
Exactly.
So how did it burn steel? And then we see molten ore, like molten steel, pouring out of the building while the fire is essentially out. Where does that come from? So there were people that thought thermite was used, right? So there's all these different theories. So what he does in these 9 videos is he goes through each one of the theories and he talks through them and he shows
why the people that work. Right.
Yeah, and he shows the people that promoted those theories. Like, there was one lady that said the building was vaporized by a space weapon.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, right? But he goes through, he takes them all seriously, and he goes through them and he shows different things, but he also shows the videos of 9/11, the actual live feed videos. And he talks about the equipment that's used on each one, et cetera, et cetera. What we wanted to do tonight was to show that you do have to look at the impact of these events. Like, does everybody remember? You remember the Greeley incident, right? You remember what that was?
Refresh my memory.
So, during World War II, basically everybody wanted the U.S. Into World War II. And what ended up happening is that none of the American people wanted to get into World War II, right? And what ended up happening was, and I think it was Greeley.
No, it was Greer. It was Greer. You're talking about the submarine attack.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
So long and short of it is, there were several of these incidents that, including including Pearl Harbor, that got the U.S. into World War II. Now, I'm not here to suggest that Pearl Harbor was an inside job. I'm not saying that. I am saying, what does it take to change public opinion? What does it take to get you as a citizen to believe it's okay for your government to spy on you? And we didn't go into some of those detailed ones that I listed, right? For NSA spying and all of those kind of things.
Right.
But I want you to think about all of those folks that are listening, how much we actually accept it. Like, we know that the government's been spying on us. We know that they've been getting information from the social media. Do we really care as our rights are stripped away? I don't know.
I doubt it. You know,
How much do we really care?
Yeah.
And is the fact that we don't care? Have we been pre-programmed to do that? By the way, I'm just saying, why don't we care? That's all I'm asking. Why don't we care? So we talked about Prism. We talked about X-Score as those. I want you guys to look those up on your own rather than me telling you about them. Because when you get into and you start looking at that, the big question you need to ask yourself is, why? Why don't I care? Right? And should I care? And why is this information being transported to global organizations? Why does someone in Australia need to know what I'm posting?
Yeah.
And this is exactly what Rubio was talking about just last week when he said this has to stop. We are putting an end to these committees, these global committees. And you may have heard, and we talked a little bit about it on the last episode about the economic side where we have folks saying, hey, we want these global organizations to return to their original mandate. We like the American world order. Remember, that was the very first one we talked about. We like the American world order. Everybody prospered.
Yeah.
What we don't like is this globalist world order. So I'm going to leave those. I'm going to leave X Key Score and Prism for you guys to take a look at, and then really as we start going into some of the details, I think on the next episode, how do we put those out there though, Sam? Like some of these links for people that.
I'll go through that. You send me the links and I'll put them out on my International Flavor Facebook page. And announce them out there as the links come out. So if people would go out and check out International Flavor, those links will be out there. The ones that I have, I will put out and I will label them, and then we can regroup next week.
Because one of the things
I like you being on the Discord and not on the telephone. I think it's been a very good.
Yeah.
Very good
so much
quality
better.
Came out.
I felt like I had to kind of scream into the phone and stuff.
Yeah.
One quick comment about all of this. When we talk about people knowing, and I mentioned this at the very beginning of the program, to believe what you're going to believe, but do your own research.
Absolutely.
Right? And
I keep questioning you and reading up on mine, and I have to rush you because we got
to go soon.
Yeah, and I don't know if you may not even be aware of this, but I actually start and end a minute early because on the radio it comes in a minute late.
I didn't know that.
So,
that's why I joined late. Okay, got it.
That is okay, but I'm gonna see you the next time. I appreciate you being here, and we'll chat through the week and see when we jump you in. This is my final show of the night, friends and neighbors. You can get on damradio.com/schedule and see some of the great shows we have on the program. You can go to internationalflavor.com and get all the past podcasts for my particular show, and damradio.com/podcasts to get everything else that is available. And then you can listen to great music through the week, also at damradio.com/live. I appreciate y'all being here tonight, and join me on Sunday night. Same time, same bat channel. Have a good evening.